Here we are, episode 274 of Tactical Crouch, Contenders Month, sort of, continuing, going to China, and with us, we have one BiggHungryPhill and one Bullskunk. Thank you both for joining me today and talking about a region that, I used to, back in my day, I used to do a little Chinese Overwatch myself.
I see. Thank you for having us. Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Has it been 2019, maybe?
I think I was 2018 season 2-ish, season 3 as well, and then I was like, oh, this is not my lane, so quickly made an exit there. But I know that you guys have been doing big things out there, so I had to bring in some experts. Give me some of the juice.
Well, we're sorry you couldn't find him and had to settle for us, but we're here.
I noticed this, when we first started talking about this, the two people that you've got here are the play-by-play casters. Historically, the people that don't know what's going on and can just talk.
No, that's not. See, I feel like play-by-plays get thrown under the bus. I think people are a little bit, I think you guys are a little bit more cognizant. You guys have the vision. Yeah. You see what's going on.
You've got to keep up the role, though. You've got to do the apes together strong version of play-by-play casting.
There you go.
Flattery will get you everywhere, my friend. All right. I like it here already. No, I appreciate you having us and appreciate putting a spotlight on the Chinese region. I feel like kind of flies under the radar sometimes. So
most definitely
appreciate this opportunity.
Yes, of course. Again, as somebody who was a proponent of Gusha before he hit the league and, talking bigging up leave and all that stuff, it's definitely has a soft spot. So I definitely always want to bring in some Chinese representation. I have audio listeners. You will not have heard a big German man because he's out gallivanting around and he doesn't love you anymore. Will he see that? I don't know. He may see this.
Is Yiska actually tall? Because he gives off, online, his impression of a big personality, small frame.
He claims to be like a 7'8" gaming warlord. I think he's actually I think he's taller than me. He might be your height, Phil. I think.
Oh, okay.
You're like 6'5".
I'm 6'4".
6'4". Okay, yeah. I think you guys might be around the same height. I've never confirmed. I can't say for sure. Never scientifically checked in with him, but he seems to claim as much. So
okay,
we'll run with that. But he is absent today. Yiska will not be here to talk about China. I know, boo-hoo. I'm sure he's very upset about that. Talking about players he knows absolutely nothing about, and a region that he couldn't keep me quiet for 274 episodes. So unlucky for him, but more for me, more for us. We're gonna have a great time, and more for our beautiful patron producers that makes this show possible. So I want to give a special thank you to our patron producers. This show is brought to you by Avril Vista Baby, Battlecrab, Refine Bean, Bronzebot Buho, Picasso, Chris R34444, Kasha67, Lolshin, Porkchop Sammy, Rex Zane, Stuck in Bronze, and our YouTube members, Ice Am Jello, William Jess, Fishman, Fire Element 6, AK Chris R, Brother, Stuck in Bronze, Samuel Esparza, Adam L, and Sagi Fumi. Contenders China. I hear there's a good team. I hear there's some good teams in Contenders China.
There are.
I think that's fair to say. Contenders China at the minute is a little bit striated in that we have the good teams and we have the, if I'm being mean, the happy to be there teams.
Hasn't that always been the case? Even back when I was doing it, I was like, man, this Zenith of Optimism team, boy, they're happy to be here.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of teams with great names and poor performances. But yeah, there are definitely some teams that I think can make a run into the Pacific Showdown that's coming up, and we'll get into those, I guess.
Beautiful. Is there a when you talk about striation, we just had we just kind of touched in Korea, and it's like, yes, it's the O2 show. That's obviously the case. That's like the most jarring and outlandish, or the sore thumb of the Contenders region as a whole, where it's just it's that team and everybody else. Is there kind of an O2 in China at the moment?
So I think there has been. So Contenders China has been weird this year, and I don't mean weird in the way that China has its reputation of playing weird stuff, they're playing meta compositions, but A side started maybe 2 weeks after players in China got hold of the first beta. And so there was a lot of guesswork going in Contenders China, and there was one team that got it and got it instantly, and they just wiped the floor with everybody else. And then things got a little bit closer in A, and then a little bit closer in B sides, and then closer still in Run It Down. But yeah, we still have HLXC and Flagship Recreaters very much at the top of that group, and have been for the entirety of this year.
I will say I felt like the level of competition definitely picked up as we got into our second and third tournament. There was a massive gap there inside A. Like it was monstrous. There was a Grand Canyon between Flagship Recreators and the rest of the pack.
I think in part of that, part of that, Jeff, is when we started up A sides, we didn't have a lot of the names you're used to seeing in Contenders China. Like, there was no Team Chaser, no Team CC, no Billy Gaming. Like a couple of teams that returned. Like I think Time Resume and Zones were the two teams that came back, and then everybody else was just like floating around on their own, forming teams that looked a little bit like some of these other bigger names, but not quite in some regards. And I think the teams that were able to stick together most of what they had last year in Contenders China are the teams that actually accomplished stuff this year.
So I know that China has never been like the biggest or most popular region, but there's definitely names that I think people, would recognize, Night God or X-Ray, Kyo, obviously coming from Chengdu. And I know that there's, and maybe you guys can correct me here, but I know like October 1 and October 2 are like, I know they're veteran players, but I still can never keep them straight. Who are they exactly? Who are the October brothers?
It was October 2 and October 3.
Oh, okay.
And October 2 was winner that spent 3 years playing for Billy.
Yes.
Never quite made it into Overwatch League, but had a long stint on Billy Gaming, which is kind of that was the O2 of Chinese contenders previously.
Sure.
And then October 3 is Mike Haley. Coming from Spark, coming from Hangzhou Spark.
And he did very helpfully stop playing as October 03 in Run It Back, which was great because having two October followed by a number on broadcast was difficult as a play-by-play caster. So he's back now playing as Kaylee, I believe.
Yes, and self-correction. I'm sorry, it was Guangzhou Charge.
Gotcha. Yes. Now those are names that I think people definitely remember.
So, I mean, we could probably go through like quite a long list of returning players because, we have this glut of, with some of the stuff that happened in the Overwatch League portion of the Chinese scene and players being dropped for various reasons. A lot of these guys found homes in Chinese contenders and consequently went on to kind of wreck shop. Like, I think the big one that stands out from B-sides into Run It Back has got to be LiGe. Who was signed for a little while onto Hangzhou Spark. In fact, sorry, I'm going to walk that back a little bit. That wasn't the jettison from this season of what happened in Overwatch League. It's actually a couple of seasons ago. He was on Hangzhou Spark by a big margin, even though the team he played for, HLXC, didn't win this season. For my money, still the best tank currently playing in Contenders China. And a very strong argument that, if you're looking to rebuild a Chinese roster, maybe you start with LiGe and go from there.
Was he on two-way? I think he was on two-way last year.
I think he might have.
Because I think he was still listed under Hangzhou Spark's roster. He was officially listed for them, but played for Billy in 2021.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right there.
He was definitely somebody that was just kind of like riding the bench for a long time. I think people who knew were like, LiGe is definitely somebody that could start. The issue with the Spark is that they just have such an abundance of like resources that, it could fall through the cracks. And obviously they were playing with a mixed roster. So, hard to necessarily break through. But I'm glad to hear that LiGe is definitely, still got it. Now, when it comes to him in particular, obviously with Overwatch 2's move to single tank, has he kind of showcased some of those traditional main tanks? Because I feel like that's like the hot button that everybody's trying to hit. Everybody can be great at the flex tanks, but once it gets to the Winston and the Rhine, is he kind of
okay. That was a big question coming into this.
Sure.
So, for those who don't know, LiGe, popped onto the scene. I first saw him playing on Team CC in 2020. Team CC was playing in Chinese contenders at that point. They hadn't moved over to Korea yet. And he played off tank there alongside Gaga. Gaga was the main tank for Team CC. LiGe was their off tank. Clearly in 2020, this is Overwatch 1, still 2 tanks. And that team may have been arguably the best contenders team we've ever seen.
Sure.
I mean, they were that level of dominant. They went to Gauntlet in 2020 and absolutely just mopped the floor with everybody, with all the Korean teams, everybody. Like it wasn't close. And that's when that team kind of got picked apart, and Gaga and LiGe both went to Overwatch League from there, and some of the other players like 1987 and who was the other? Oh my gosh, I just spaced on who their other support was. They all went to Overwatch League. Is my point. So it's not even about them. It's about LiGe. And so coming into the single tank setup, there was that question of can LiGe actually play the traditional main tanks to this high level? And we didn't get to find that out until Run It Back. All we saw was Junker Queen for side A and side B.
And to interject there, Jeff, like one of the reasons that we were talking so much about LiGe on the way into this is because his Junker Queen was so good. Taking fights that I don't think any other Junker Queen would take if they were up in numbers, down players, ulting through them, and just decimating what was there. Like the mechanics and the game sense was so good on that hero in particular that earned him a lot of credit reputation-wise.
I mean, and we're talking easily owl level good. Like just in a vacuum, his Junker Queen was head and shoulders above anybody that I had seen. I mean, frankly, I would give him best Junker Queen across all of Tier 2, across all 5 regions.
Interesting. Ooh. Okay. That's impressive. I mean, even just like with what you're saying there, Phil, where it's like, taking these really aggressive fights almost has like this air of like Hanbin, of like Dallas Fuel trying to like really
the name I was thinking.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Like just the absolute means to carry from the tank position is not something that like every team can say. So I'm getting that energy from the both of you that like, yes, this is like if Chengdu has to like start from scratch again, LiGe possibly could be, that pinnacle piece, that centerpiece of this rebuild that could be happening. Who's to say?
Well, okay, so let's move into our most recent tournament of Run It Back.
Sure.
Obviously, we're no longer in a Junker Queen meta, and LiGe has to play the Winston. I mean, we actually saw LiGe play all 10 tanks in one of the series.
We did, technically.
We literally played all 10 tanks in 3 maps of Overwatch.
Sure. I will add the caveat here, that was against Zones, who did not have a great time.
This is in qualifiers, and they are playing some of the weaker teams.
Sure.
But then once we got to real performance, the Winston looked pretty darn good. Now, I think we can zoom in on the winners finals versus the grand finals, which was HLXC versus Flagship Recreators in both instances. HLXC dominated clean 3-0 in the winners finals. And it was all Winston Rush. It was all that Winston composition that we had seen through our finals.
Sure.
And LiGe looked fantastic. Then we go to the grand finals, and X-Ray kind of diffed a little bit on the Winston.
Sure.
So we had this solid sold, ship it stonks are high. LiGe is the absolute best until the very last game of the year, and then suddenly there are question marks. So that's for me where I don't know if the consistency would be there if you're talking about a 9-month season.
I think the really fun thing about that is that we've now seen HLXC and Flagship Recreators play each other 2 times across Run It Back and B-Sides. And that kind of pattern has kind of repeated itself, because in B-Sides, Flagship Recreators were knocked down into the lower bracket by HLXC. It was then a clean 3-0 to put them into the lower bracket. They met in the finals, and it was a 4-2, much closer, very hardly fought. And then the same thing happens again in Run It Back. They get knocked out 3-0, and they come back, and this time they're able to just like tip it over the edge and win out over HLXC, who were the favorites coming into that.
So in totality, they played each other 4 times, and it's 3-1 for HLXC. But that one is your most recent grand finals.
Okay.
Flagship.
So what I'm kind of hearing from that is that there is this kind of like inter-region rivalry between HLXC and Flagship, where like these are the 2 front horses, and it's just like who's better on the day, whose meta are we stepping into, who's performing a little bit better. Is that kind of the case?
I think so. And to give a little more backstory to this, is that whilst we're talking about them as HLXC and Flagship Recreators, these rosters go back further as a unit. So actually, you can extend this rivalry further because HLXC at their core is a rebuilding of an earlier Billy Gaming roster.
Sure.
Flagship Recreators, if the name doesn't give it away, is a rebuild of an earlier Flag Gaming roster.
Right.
And so, like, we have actually seen these players in various iterations play against each other for the past 2+ years, I think, in Contenders.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, 3
names that I reckon. Now, doing a little bit of like a glossary, I don't want to dive too deep into the VODs because I know I got experts coming on, so I'll just pick their brains. One team that was kind of odd to me that wasn't performing as well as I felt like the name recognition deserves, and I think everybody knows where I'm headed.
Yeah.
Solace Victorum, if I'm even saying that right, did not study Latin. How does a team with Eileen, Crystal, and Shou Chang, whom I've kind of flip-flopped on throughout the last like 5-6 years, how riddle me this? How is this team not like dominating everybody?
So I think it's a couple of different things over a couple of different seasons, like through A sides, B sides, and Run It Back. Solace Victorum in Run It Back were doing some interesting meta things. So we actually got a chance to talk to there are very few of the Chinese staff on Twitter because of the barrier that's there, but we do have some of them here and there. And we got a chance to talk to Caitlin very briefly, who is a manager of Flagship Recreators, but also knows the scene a little better than us. And we were watching Solace Victorum do things like in a very heavy Winston Sojourn, like the Kiriko Banana Rush, as we were calling it meta. They were doing things like running the Doomfist. It's like, okay. A lot. And like we saw them do it against, I don't think it was Zones, but a Zones level team.
Sure.
And it worked because like the rest of the quality of the roster was high enough that it didn't really make a big difference whether or not they were on the Doomfist or not. But then they started doing it against teams like Flagship Recreators. Like, well, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, it is such a Doomfist at the time, despite how he is now, was just a trash tier pick, complete throw pick. Yeah. And we got a chance to talk to Caitlin specifically about that. And they were saying that it was because they were so worried about shutting down Seawave on Flagship Recreators. Like, they wanted just something to disrupt Seawave, who we can talk about later as maybe the best DPS player in the region right now. And like, I think that focus on that sticking point in particular didn't help them because they put themselves on the back foot so much with this one thing of like, oh, we'll just shut down Seawave and it'll go. So as far as Run It Back goes, I think it was just not a misread, but a strange strategic choice. For A sides and B sides, I think it actually gets a little bit harder to do. And I try and steer away from the analysis of, oh, this team was just better, because we'd like to know a little more than that. But like, if you look on a role per role basis, I think it's hard to argue that certainly for B sides, the Solace Victorum roster across each role just quite weren't as good as Flagship Recreators. I'm just trying to find the B sides roster for Solace Victorum. Yeah, so Solace Victorum, they had Pressure, a Korean tank player, come in for B sides. They also had Elva on the DPS, and so they had I think maybe in fact the only cross language roster in the region. I would like to think that has some impact on this as well. And then there were questions about what role Molanran was picking up in that meta. So we saw Molanran kind of flex between, like, in the fairly classic DPS flex of like running the Brig and running things like Hanzo from game to game. And I just think they didn't really know what they wanted to do or what their best look was in some of these matchups. And, you get that wrong at a critical time and you're going to lose the entire series.
For sure.
I mean, and just to elaborate on that, I don't think that Solace Victorum really got that together until Run It Back. That's when they pulled Shou Chang over. They got Shou Chang from Flagship Recreators, actually. Flagship Recreators said, ooh, X-Ray, upgrade. And then Shou Chang went over to Solace. But Solace were running 4 DPS and like 1 support and like change tanks from A sides to B sides, then change tanks again from B sides to Run It Back. Had Molanran originally listed as like a player coach, but bounced around between DPS and support role. Like they didn't quite have a whole team.
No.
Like they just didn't have all the pieces together until Run It Back. And they started to look better. They went from 4th in A sides to 4th in B sides to 3rd and run it back. So we'll call that improvement. But to answer your original question of how you look at these names, you're like, I recognize all these names. These players have got some talent. How did this not perform better? I think part of it was they didn't put together a complete team, and which is, I mean, this is bringing back deja vu, right?
Sure.
Like, this has just got so many shades of Valiant on it, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, the organization just wasn't there to create a focus, to get all the guns pointed in the right direction, have an identity, and then take that identity into the competition and perform at your highest level. They just never got that really dialed in, or at least they took so long to get that dialed in. They were already
just
two steps behind. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have, I mean, and going up against, your top 2, like they did well against the rest of this, the rest of the other teams that lined up the tournament. I want to call it a roster, but that's not a roster. That's
I mean, it kind of is.
But they still didn't come close to taking out Flagship or HLXC.
No, but I will add as like a little bit of a caveat on that is that there were 2 teams that took maps off of Flagship Recreaters in Run It Back. Solace Victorum was one of those. They did take a control map off of Flagship Recreaters, who then went, oh wait, actually maybe we do need to take these guys a little bit more seriously. And like when we were talking about the striation here of like the good teams and the happy to be there teams, A sides, the good team was Flagship Recreators. B sides, it was Flagship Recreators and HLXC. I do think there's an argument to say that the good teams here are Solace Victorum, Flagship, and HLXC. Maybe you could argue we've got like great, good, everybody else, and Solace Victorum in the good thing. But like, I think with a rebuild season for Overwatch League in China coming up, we're about to see all of this really go into flux. And if there's not roles here for players on Solace Victorum to move into Overwatch League, there certainly is room for them to move up into a team with a track record of success like Flagship or HLXC.
And there's a question on what patch we'll see in Pacific Showdown. We can get into that a little bit more later. But if we land in a Doomfist meta,
Shouchang's, that's, I don't even need, that's just what he does. I may have tilted at him ad nauseum when he was in Goats, but he just couldn't play Doomfist, so that was that. And his DPS actually wasn't terrible, so I got to give him credit there. But
we can straight up land in a Godfist meta. Potentially, depending on what happens with the patch. And suddenly Solace Victorum might look like they could be a 2nd or 3rd place team.
Could be upset bound.
I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like they're gonna take down O2. I don't care what meta it is, but they could upset some of these other squads. They could upset T1 or even Flagship. Or I mean, it's possible. It's possible.
It's actually, I've just brought up the bracket now. It's really rough. Guess who Solace Victorum's first game is in the Pacific Showdown?
Yes, and it's
O2.
It's O2. Yeah. So.
It's double elim though. So
congrats on your lower
It's an early run. Yeah, it's an early Godfist run. That's the beauty of the Chinese region. It's like you can name them a couple different ways. They export a lot of like solid hit scan, and they got some Doomfist players. Shout out, back in the day, like Shouchang and Micha, all those good names from way back when. But one name from Solace that definitely has caught my eye, and I feel like I've seen some commentary about this on the old Bird app as well. What's up with Crystal? Crystal was definitely somebody that I remember as being super talented, but never really landed all that well in OWL. So what's the modern take with Crystal these days?
Perfectly serviceable Sojourn player, I think, is the best thing you can say about Crystal.
Okay.
Nowhere near C-Wave levels. I'm trying to think
or
of this.
Kaylee.
Yeah, or Kaylee, thank you. But, still better than all the other Sojourn players that we had in Contenders China.
I'll put an asterisk next to that, but continue.
Oh, go on. Let's hear the asterisk.
Flandre.
Yeah, Flandre. Yeah.
Flandre put up an incredible performance on a middling team and drug them into 4th place on a team that came out of Open Division or whatever their equivalent is to Open Division, Open Test or whatever they call it. But
I think it is just Open Division.
Is it just Open Division? Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I thought Flandre was phenomenal, up and coming, like not C-Wave, Mike Haley level,
a development prospect.
Yeah,
but I think put up a comparable performance to Crystal, frankly, on a much worse squad.
All right, fine. Let's agree to compromise and put him and Crystal at about level there. Like, did we actually get to see them play each other? I can't remember. I need to go back and look at the bracket.
Yes, that was your third place game.
There we go. Yeah. Which, Solace Victorum did come out on top on that one, so maybe I'm a little bit justified. We'll see.
No, I mean their roster all around was better, but I'm just talking strictly the Sojourn.
Just eye test, peer to peer. Flandre, it looks comparable, and I'm here for it. That's kind of the antithesis, or not the antithesis, the actual thesis of what I'm really looking for is people like the Flandres, people like the Skeweds, where it's like, okay, I need to get in touch with all these representatives for the contenders. We gotta get our scouting done. So it's like, okay, cool. If Flandre and Crystal could be even talked about in the same level, it communicates that super, super well to people who know OWL, where it's like, okay, that's a name that we should be keeping an eye on. So that's really interesting.
Flandre is definitely one of those. Okay. Real quick, I'm sorry. I'll give you the mic just a second, Phil. I was just going to say that I think you could have swapped Crystal and Flandre on their rosters, and you wouldn't have seen a giant difference in performance from the squads as a whole. That would be my theory on it.
Mm-hmm. So what I was going to add is actually the Tidal Destruction Gaming, which is the roster that inherited the Tidal Destruction Gaming are like a slight rebuild of the Time Resume roster who disbanded following B-sides. I actually think it's a really interesting roster when you look at who's on there, particularly the fact that, again, it's one of the few mixed language rosters. Right. Them and Team Arslan, I think, also had Korean players. So they have Emolga previously of... this is why I should always keep Liquipedia open. So
I've got my notes next to me
here. About. I feel has played for like First Fabulous Fighter, Blossom, Dark Mode Korea, Starlight Gaming. And in addition to that, they also picked up Apollo, who Apollo is a weird one for me because we picked up in A-sides a group of players who hadn't really had a chance to digest Overwatch 2. And the team that Apollo was playing for at the time, which was NGUS, just ran Zarya comps the entire time.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah. And like Apollo, bless his heart, did everything he could on the Zarya in that meta, and it just didn't work out, but has clearly done enough on the heroes in that time for the Time Resume rebuilders TDG to pick him up again. We also have there's a lot of like, oh yeah, this player was in Contenders on this roster. Like it's a really interesting roster, and I kind of hope they keep together, refine, and we see them in whatever comes next for this level of play in China.
I mean, there's only one player that made it over from Time Resume. They inherited their slot, but I mean, a lot of the Time Resume people went to Meta Rays. Did they not?
Yeah, I'm getting this confused. Thank you.
So that's where their players went. Tidal Destruction did get the Time Resume slot, and they got BBT. Or who played for him, was last year, wasn't even on this year's roster. But this Tidal Destruction roster, like 3 of the players we had heard nothing out of. Like their Wikipedia, their first entry is this year.
Right.
I mean, they are
complete
very
rookies.
Green.
Yeah.
Right. And this is my expectations were at the bottom for this squad. And I think that's one of the reasons they impressed me so much. And Flandre is one of those. Flandre is NGUS, who, I mean, they played in A-sides. I believe that's the only entry. That's the only entry for Flandre. Like that's, and then I mean, and this gamer impressed the hell out of me. Yeah. There was like Emolga is like the longest tenure of any players on the squad, but no, Tidal Destruction got 4th place. Like that's
impressive. Yeah.
They did good work. They did good work.
If you're telling me that these guys are coming in super green and, still taking games or maybe even running it close against a team, for example, running, circling back to like Solace Victorum, where it's like you have somebody like Eileen and Crystal and Shochang and Ouya. It's like, I mean, even BLX kind of like rings some bells. I'm not like super familiar, but like that's definitely a name that I remember, where it's just like, okay, like complete rookies, solid veterans who've played in the league. It's like, okay, there should be some discrepancy here. And it seems like it's at least, competitive.
Yeah, I think a really good mark in their favor is that, as Jeff so kindly reminded me, the Time Resume roster became Mata Rays almost wholesale, like a couple of swaps. They played each other on day 3, and it was a 3-1 in favor of Tidal Destruction Gaming. So, like, Mata Rays, Time Resume, they have actually been playing together for a long time. They were a very strong team in A-sides and B-sides, and here TDG came in and just knock them out in day 3.
So definitely like this up and coming team that like is doing, you know, kind of shaking up the region.
That's your next generation of Chinese players.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
Title Destruction to me are your next generation of names that will become household, assuming that the region continues to grow and thrive.
Sure.
And that match, all Preds were on Matter Rays. Like no one expected Title Destruction to pull that one out. Every single person gave Matter Rays the edge on that one. And we were all wrong. And it was a joy to watch. It was a joy to be wrong and to watch that happen.
Isn't that always fun? Frankly. You get to be wrong. And it's just like, whoa, like this is so against convention. And
I'm wrong, but I don't mind it.
Yeah. I love when that happens.
One other point, again, in favor of Title Destruction Gaming, is they did take a map off of Solace Victorum, who we were just talking about being up in that upper strata. So, yeah, we are definitely, for the region, way healthier at running back than we were in A-Sides, where it was just a one-sided stomp the entire time.
But then top 3 teams were all your veterans, right? And I think... I definitely think there's some things that we could touch on there, unless you had anything else you wanted to mention for Title Destruction.
No.
Because I'm anxious to talk about Flagship. We've kind of spoken their name a bit, but we haven't really gotten to delve into this roster yet. And this roster is exciting. I mean, they are the champions. Like HLXC were favored. Flagship took it and looked really, really good doing so.
And with how much love you're giving C-Wave, it's just like, okay, that's definitely a name that like I can recall back to and like see kind of that same almost like Flandre-esque story where it's just like kind of played on some lower ranked teams and like now is being built up as this, you know, almost maybe a pinnacle of, you know, where China's at currently. So yes, give me all the Flagship juice.
Well, I think certainly talking about C-Wave, here's the metric for me is there is, even having done 3 seasons of it now, there is nobody in the community who understands Contenders China more than Kenobi, and I know you guys are close.
Yes, very much so.
For Kenobi's money, and for my money, C-Wave is the best hit scan currently operating in Contenders China, and I think that was true last season as well, even if the team overall was only 2nd place.
I would go so far as to say the best DPS.
Really? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I with this most recent meta, I feel a little bit sorry for every DPS who is looking to make a career for themselves who is not on Sojourn.
Sure, yeah.
Because like, yes, your Reaper is there, and maybe they'll get a nice Death Blossom every now and then, but like for sheer punching power, for sheer building a name for yourself, right now nothing matters quite so much as a Sojourn. So sure, Night God definitely had a great season, but there's a reason why we're talking about C-Wave first. And like, don't get me wrong, I am actually a big fan of Night God. On the end of A-Sides, nobody impressed me more than Night God. And maybe at least in part of that was like watching him pub stomp a little bit was quite a lot of fun.
Sure.
So like, you know, he would I can't think who the game was against, but I remember watching him play around on Midtown, where I think he started on Pharah, went to the Genji, went back to the Pharah, and just like they just couldn't touch him. He was playing up against enemy spawn on Pharah, which like talk about heroes with a high risk factor, and like they just couldn't touch him. Really, really strong player. Well,
and then going back to C-Wave, I think a similar thing could be said, and where it's not just the Sojourn. We saw that with the Widowmaker. I mean, like Widowmaker on Dorado comes to mind. I believe that was B-Sides, but it was C-Wave absolutely just took over the entire lobby. And I hadn't seen anybody take over a lobby with a Widowmaker like that in a long time, where it was, if you got anywhere close, like point A got capped, but the cart never moved. Yeah. You got anywhere close to that gate of point A Dorado, C-Wave took their head off. And it was insane. It was incredible to watch.
It's nice to hear, because my recollection of these two names is like, oh, like there's potential here. There's, you know, maybe they could grow into something good, and to hear like the flowers that you guys are giving them, and like to hear that they're like standing atop the region is like, you know, some of the best prospects that you could kind of pluck out of the region is like super fun. But one name in particular that has been like teetering on the edge, I keep asking around. You brought up Kenobi, and I'm like, you know, what's up with tank? You know, give me some good tanks. And I'm like, I hear some good stuff about X-Ray, but like I do a little research and I'm like, okay, there's something here. There's something, I don't know. What's your guys' kind of opinion there? Because I feel like when I look at it, I'm like, it's close. And this was like last year. It's close, but like, do you think he's pushed over the edge? Maybe is he 2023 ready?
I think X-Ray is definitely an upgrade for Flagship Recreaters over. Sorry, you're gonna have to help me out here, Jeff. Was it Shochang playing for them?
It was
last season?
Shochang, yes.
Yeah, definitely think he's an upgrade over Shochang. I think at least part of the reason why we saw Flagship win this one out over HLXC, and we talked about this earlier when talking about whether or not LiGe can manage the main tank role.
Sure.
Is that it was a main tank meta in this season. Like it was a Winston meta, and that is kind of X-Ray's bread and butter. He's, in Overwatch terms, he's a main tank. LiGe is an off tank. And LiGe is clearly doing very well at the Winston. You've got to finish second in this region. But I think it was just a much more comfortable experience for X-Ray here. And clearly he's got some good gelling here with the rest of the team.
X-Ray looked fantastic, particularly on Grand Finals day. Sure. X-Ray stepped up on the Winston in a big way.
Yeah.
And was very aggressive. And there was, like, I mean, Paul and LaFawn were talking last week, like, HLXC just kind of dropped the spaghetti everywhere, and it was an easily preventable loss. They did seem
like
to change.
A fun thing to say.
Yeah, pretty much. They did change up their tactics. Like it felt like HLXC weren't peeling as much, but X-Ray was getting so much more value in the grand finals than he was able to get in the winners finals. The winners finals, X-Ray would dive in, and the entirety of HLXC would just collapse onto X-Ray, and they would take the tank out first. That wasn't happening in grand finals. X-Ray was managing to avoid that peel and get the timing right to where they were starting to really punish, be it a support or a vulnerable DPS. X-Ray was doing a much better job in the grand finals of recognizing the vulnerable target and being able to pounce on it without sacrificing themselves to do it. And we're talking in 1 day turnaround, right? Those were back-to-back days of gameplay. And X-Ray looked a tier above from winners finals to grand finals. I don't know what they had for breakfast that morning, but it didn't look like the same player. If we can see that X-Ray eating Winston-O's every day, then absolutely he is out ready.
Okay. That's a solid, like, what's interesting is it inspires me with a lot of hope with how much, obviously there's some tumultuous stuff going on with Blizzard in China at the moment, and nobody really knows what's going on with APAC. So it's really nice to hear that there is this kind of like budding of talent, that like there is talent here that you can promote and like apply to some of these teams where it's just like, okay, I love me some Jinmu, but like, does Chengdu need a third DPS? Probably. Does it have to be somebody like Seawave or Night God? Possibly. There are names that you can pull from, and that's what's super exciting. And it's not just like, oh, we'll just promote that team. It's like, bits and pieces here. Maybe this team could be promoted, wholesale.
I think you could probably look at Flagship or HLXC and go, yeah, that's actually a great start. You pick up all or most of that roster, and then like pick little bits and pieces here from there. I think if you were looking at a full rebuild in China, and we certainly have some teams that have dropped a good number of members here. Right. There is an opportunity here for an Overwatch League team to kind of pull the sticks out from under the contenders region right now. If you were to pick up for your roster both X-Ray and LiGe, I think suddenly the competition at contenders level in the region levels out at least a little bit here. Sure. And then everyone else in Chinese Overwatch at Overwatch League level is like, well, okay, who is left to pick up? And they're kind of getting the leavings of who wasn't brought back into Overwatch League. I think that'd be a really fun thing to see as and when we get rebuilds.
What that kind of says to me, and maybe you guys can kind of extrapolate on this, which I feel like kind of is a similar thread to Korea, and I'm interested to see if this moves farther into other regions as well, because I have a sneaking suspicion it might, is that a lot of the dominance, a lot of the success-driven teams, these teams that see repeat success and that do kind of like you mentioned earlier, Phil, they kind of stratify themselves out, are these teams with like really prominent tanks. Would you kind of agree there? For the both of you, really?
I will let Jeff have the mic in a second, because I've been talking for the past 2 minutes. I think it's twofold, and I can hear our friend Ethan Ocean sort of hammering on the door to get this point across. Great tanks absolutely will set you up for success, but if you look at the top two teams, they are, despite the fact that the names may have changed and maybe they split apart, but they've come back together. What they have is time together as players. So, like when we talk about like picking up individual talent, that is absolutely great. I think at the contenders level, have a roster that stays together for a long time and takes this talent, polishes it to a fine mirror sheen. Those are the teams that win every time. And like this is demonstrable across every region. Like look at O2 Blast, look at okay, slightly historic teams now in British Hurricane, but any team that can be together for a long time. Yes, you need the core pieces, but I think that is the big difference maker, honestly.
Agreed.
It kind of feels historically that tanks have never been China's strong suit.
No, I agreed there. Never the case.
So it's always been very DPS forward in this region. But when you do have those Gushis, when you have Gaga or LiGe, when you have X-Ray, it's when it kind of pushes that team up a notch. Yes. And feels so, I which makes it tough to judge how those tanks would stack up against some of the other main tanks coming out of or some other tanks coming out of the other regions. Of course. So I mean that's kind of where I land on that. Like, I mean X-Ray and LiGe look really good in this tournament. How would they stack up against somebody like Off? Like,
it's definitely hard to see them internationally. But what's so interesting, and I kind of got this feeling from LaFon and Paul last show, was that like, yes, O2 is like so good. They have all these good players, of course, but like when you start to like bridge the gap and you look at these other teams, a lot of what you hear consistently amongst these like second, third, fourth place teams is that their tanks are very consistent. They have this identity, they have a style, and it seems very focused around the tank player, especially within Overwatch 2. Obviously, the move to one tank makes it harder to kind of find that identity. People are still kind of like trying to suss that out. So it is a narrative that I'm interested to explore, and it's interesting to kind of see at least some of the stirrings there. So one of the things that I do want to do, just as a fun little experiment during these contender shows, is I want to give each kind of guest their dream team. Like if you had to build if you had to promote a team wholesale today that you could build, I place you in the GM position for Chinese expansion team number 5, right? And you have to build a team. What does your team look like? We'll start with you, Bullskunk. What's at least the core? Give me the core. Let's start with the core, and then we'll move to Phill.
Oh, okay. Does it have to be like? Do I have to just pick up a team, or do I mix and match?
You get to mix and match whatever your dream team looks like from Run It Back, A sides, B sides. You get to pick it.
Oh, that is an interesting one. I mean, okay, I would stick with Sea Wave and Night God.
Okay.
Like that's your DPS line. They are consistently awesome. I think they cover a decent amount of heroes. Do I have a player limit on this? Like, can I take LiGe and X-Ray?
I'll say 6. I'll say 6.
Okay.
Like, let's do league minimum 6 players, so you have your 5 starters and a sub.
Oh, this is an interesting one. Because if I'm gonna build a dream team, I would absolutely pick up both of them.
Sure,
because it does
seems like they complement each other.
Exactly, as we've touched on, they absolutely kind of fill the void of each other's hero pools, very much so. And I mean, if you want a Sigma map, like you want LiGe out there, like 100%. The supports for me is where it gets a little dicey, and I thought Sentry was a really good Lucio. I mean, I think I would actually take Salvation. I think I would split their support line.
Okay.
And take Salvation's Kiriko and Century's Lucio. That may be a crazy take. As a tank player, judging supports is not my best attribute.
Sure.
But I think that's where by my eye test, I think that's where I would lie. Yeah. Okay. X-Ray, LiGe, Sea Wave, Night God, Century, and Salvation.
All right, Phil, what's your team looking like?
So here's the awkward thing is that I am 100% in agreement with Jeff here. That would have, if I had gone first, that would have been exactly the team that I picked as well.
Okay.
So let me have a think. So I have been for a while a big fan of Night God and Seawave. I would want to keep those two together. I think they work particularly well together. It's hard to make an argument not to pick up both Liga and X-Ray. I really, what can you do that is better than that as a tank lineup in this region? I don't think there is an option. If we were going into a Godfist meta, if we had to have a Doomfist, sure, you pick up Shoucheng, but I don't think that is enough of a. You can't pick up a player because they play one hero incredibly well at this level. You want someone with a bit of flexibility. Yeah, I struggle to think of. You could maybe argue that Lai from Mata Rays is worth a shot in the tank lineup. But the only reason I would be saying that is because I didn't want to have exactly the same set of picks as Jeff. I think he's actually nailed that, and that is the team you pick up from Contenders China.
Honestly, this puts a huge smile on my face thinking about this squad. I feel like that team would actually slap. Like,
I would sponsor that team. I would no problem at all. Get my name on the jersey.
We'll get the old Kickstarter running, and we'll have to self-fund this team, Valiant style, and get these guys in there. Because
I feel like we may be doing October 2 and Kaylee a little bit of a disservice because they were really good. They were. Damn it, Seawave and Night God, this synergy is just undeniable. And apologies if I cut you off there.
No. Where we've kind of landed with this is, you could probably pick up any of the players from the top two teams.
I mean, that's a given. It's difficult to not win, especially with how the tier 2 ecosystem is as it is. It's hard for these regions not to be super stratified. So it's just maybe you have the gem project player that you want to tag along and be your little, shonen protagonist that's going to climb the ranks and try real hard and become Hokage one day, right? It's just hard not to just go two teams, very good, smash together, great team.
Put proper on the Dallas Fuel, boom. Good.
Really good, and they get better. How do you get anywhere different from that? I call me biased, but Eileen, no, nobody's interested, or you just don't want to break up the kind of synergy that Seawave and Night God have. It's
really hard to judge whether Eileen is good enough at Overwatch 2 to really go toe-to-toe with them, because Solace Victorum are still, if you compare them to the top two teams, just not in a fit place to compete right now. And, we can talk about, was that the fact that, Shoucheng is kind of a specialist when he has asked to do a generalist role? He doesn't do well enough and the team collapses around that. I don't know. But, I could be, I'm open to being convinced that Eileen is worth a pickup here. He certainly has the track record and the history for it, but just was not impressive enough to make him the first run pick for me.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at the meta, and I have to imagine, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I look at this roster and I see Crystal, I'm like, okay, that's probably, and you guys kind of mentioned it, that's probably your Sojourn player, so it's all right, Molanran and Eileen are on Reaper duty, not the most flashy, not the most super high representative, and you're just kind of stuck there. It's a lock, right? You don't really play much else, so it's that's not something Eileen's mostly known for, right? You want to play the Genji, you want to play the Tracer, and it's just like you're saying, if he doesn't have the platform to do it, how can we judge him?
This is weird thing for me to say on air, and I may regret saying it.
Okay.
Molanran for me is a little bit of a guilty pleasure.
No,
I agree. No, I agree. 100%. I agree.
By which I mean, I watched them play in B-sides, and Molanran was swapping duty between Brig and then the Flex DPS role, and notably the Hanzo. And I'd have to go back and figure out what exactly map it was. But it's a match that cost them their run in the tournament, so a lower bracket run towards the end. And we saw Molanran swapped off of the Brig onto the Hanzo, and he just wrecked shop. It was a Circuit Royale map, and they just couldn't deal with Molanran. And it's oh yeah, I've predicted Solace Victorum taking this map. Yeah, I'm back in the game, baby. And then boom, back on Brig, and the whole thing just fell apart. So I don't know. I have a complicated relationship with Molanran, and I kind of think it would be fun to have him on a team. He's clearly very flexible.
Yeah.
But also he can find so many ways to disappoint me.
Oh,
so fun to watch, though.
Yeah.
Mullerita is like chaos theory embodied into an Overwatch player.
100%.
And it's a joy to watch.
Can I just very quickly interject? Go and look at Molan Rand's player picture on Wikipedia, because it just suits what we've been saying about him so well. Like, he just looks like such a little scamp.
Yeah. He's a little rascally guy. He's just a funny little guy.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that like you approach that with such hesitation, because that is exactly my relationship with him. Like, even going back prior to like the Contenders era, where it was, I think he was playing on T1W at the time, like way back when in like the Premier League, where he's always been this like really gadgety player, where they have him on some supports and they put him on Pharah, and then they put him on these really odd like projectile heroes that just like have never really been meta. And you can see the talent, and then he goes and plays Sombra and feeds his brains out, and it's just like, okay, what the like, what are we doing here, guy? And it's so frustrating. And I think you had such a you encapsulated the feeling around Molan so well. I couldn't agree more.
He's so reliable until he isn't, and then
it's a fun time.
I just see a mischievous little gremlin in that picture now. Like, right? So right.
Scamp is the right word.
Scamp, perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah.
You betcha.
Now, was there a team for the both of you that you felt like, given an extra week, given, maybe a patch or something, some kind of change, not necessarily to the roster, but like there was something more there that, given more time, that maybe they could have clicked? Is there a team or a player that kind of fits that bill for the both of you? Bullskunk, we'll start going there. Anybody?
We've touched on title destruction a bit, and I think they just need time. Again, a bunch of rookies. Like, if they come back next year, I think they could continue to grow at a very quick pace, just from given what we saw. But I think End had a lot of potential.
Okay.
And it was really a couple of players on there where I think they had some potential to showcase more if they had one little piece, if they had one something else. And I assume you'll probably go into your Skewed Award here at some point. I am prepped for that, so I don't want to
we won't name and shame anybody just yet.
I don't want to throw everybody out there just yet. I will say that's a team. Okay, there were two teams that took a map off of Flagship Recreators. We talked about Solace Victorum being one of them. End was the other team that took a map off of Flagship Recreators.
Interesting.
On Colosseo. And I mean, it was, there was CNZ was a name that stood out, like played Genji randomly. And
played really well on Genji.
And played really, really well on Genji in a meta that is very much not a Genji meta. So, like, you got to give some props to that, but you're like, it's kind of, again, back to a one-trick hero type of deal. I'm not saying that they were one-trick. That sounded too harsh, but you got to have more flexibility and show more proficiency on more than just one hero. But, man, did that Genji look really good.
Sure. So, I mean, you kind of hinted at it. I mean, Phil, was there anybody there, team or player-wise, that felt that bill? Just a little bit more time?
The sort of awkward and argumentative side of me wants to say Zones, just because I think it's funny to say that maybe after all these years, Zones could finally be good.
Okay.
I think there's an argument to be made here for Mata Ray's time resume as was prior to this season. So they shook up their roster a little bit. I believe they lost Coldest to HLXC. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they've had Mika and Coldest on their roster, which was those two have played together for a very long time. They picked up Who instead, which is funny if you're a fan of old jokes about baseball. But also, I think like with a bit more time, with a meta that suits them a little better, Mata Rays could be in the conversation for being up in that upper echelon. They just didn't quite hit it and run it back.
Let me curveball this as like an aside there. Like, what does that meta look like? The Dream Mata Rays meta. Like, what's the key there that unlocks this team to kind of push them into like the
I mean, to get on with the conversation we were having about like teams living and dying by their tank.
Sure.
If they're going to stick with LiGe, then it's a meta that suits LiGe, who is a little more traditionally an off-tank player.
Gotcha.
You have a diva meta. I think that suits them nicely. Sigma maybe a little bit as well.
Okay.
See, and I was thinking anything dive.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's because I think Akita and Akato are kind of two you would want to lean into for Modern Rays, and they go to that dive look, and they looked way better than playing any of the rush style comps. So I think if you went into a dive meta, and I don't know if LiGe has like a wrecking ball in their pocket or anything, which I know is more like
Or
Overwatch 1
mating,
dive,
but still.
right? But something along those lines, I think would suit them a lot more than the rush style metas we've gotten from both the Junker Queen and the Winston Rush. I mean, it could still be Winston dive, but played with Genji Tracer and very traditional dive.
Yeah. All right. Now I know Bullskunk, you kind of alluded to it, but I do find it interesting to try to suss out a Skewed Award winner. It sounds like you've got a name prepped and ready to go. So let's hear it. Who's your Skewed Award winner?
And it is from End, and it is actually a support player, but it is a flex support, not a main support. It is Plane. The Kiriko from End was incredible. Was a big reason they won that Coliseum map. And I think a real shining light on a squad that was otherwise kind of weird. I felt like Plane was holding this together. I mean, they just pulling everything out. Like, get the duct tape. Like, give me some chairs. We're just gonna put it in front of this gap. I mean, you can see like arms just growing out, trying to plug all of the holes in this team. And I felt like they were one that if you put them on a better roster, they would look like a phenomenal Kiriko. And it is within that vacuum of all we've seen is Kiriko for the entirety of 2022, but that stood out to me to such a degree that they took a map off of the champions based on that alone. Had a 60-second rush built up, like to where they got an additional rush over Flagship Recreators throughout like 2 or 3 team fights. They lapped Flagship as far as building up Kitsune Rush, and that absolutely steamrolled them into winning that map. And it was all on the back of Plane.
Interesting. For such a milquetoast name, doesn't sound incredibly plain to me. Phil, is there anybody that kind of sticks out for you that deserves a spotlight?
Yeah, so weirdly, we've actually already spoken about them, and they are on the same team. CNZ, for End, I think showed a degree of flexibility and talent that I think, with a little more time and on the right roster, with the right coaching in particular, I think stands to be a real future prospect here. I think one of the problems for End is that they had, if you go look at their roster, it's 4 DPS, 1 tank, 2 support. Yeah. And so when you are splitting time between that many players, what you end up with is a lot of quite good DPS players. And what you would really like is 2 phenomenal DPS players. And so with a bit more focus, I think, with a bit more focus and a meta that really suits a player like CNZ, and he is, from what we've seen from him so far, like a very classical flex DPS player. You're talking Genji, a bit of Tracy, that kind of stuff. So I think CNZ is definitely a name to look out for in the next whatever we get from Contenders China.
Sure. Maybe a player to kind of climb up, join a flagship, join a HLXC, just to try to grow within the region. Maybe even, who knows?
Yeah, get the guy in apprenticeship in a slightly smaller, better coached roster, and I think he'll climb.
I do want to give another shout out to Flandre. We mentioned it earlier. I mean, they did Title Destruction actually did fairly well. So I don't consider that somebody coming from a shit team. So that's why he didn't get my Skewed Award, but I still want to reiterate Flandre is a name to watch out for. I just want to give him that shout.
It's definitely I don't watch a ton of League of Legends, but I get the connection there. I believe that Flandre is a former I think the name comes from a former time Chinese League of Legends pro.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
I think it was an AD carry. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the comments can correct me. All that good stuff. So it's
fun story on that. I know Aspas who is their teammate, their DPS player, and I didn't know that until I saw it at the Esports Awards last night. And I was like, Aspas, wait a minute, that's where they got that name from. Oh, okay. They got voted for Play of the Year or whatever. And it was a league player or something like that. Anyway,
it's not super uncommon. I very vaguely remember a couple players changing their names and kind of giving homage to some esports legends back in the day. But obviously, one of the big kind of pieces of news or focal points on your guys' agenda obviously has been Pacific Showdown qualifiers, tournament proper coming up. I know that we kind of talked about it earlier with Solace Victorum, but I'm going to hit you with the hard-hitting questions right at the gate. Is who's the best team? Maybe not who's the best team. Let's do it this way. Who are you rallying behind from China to try to get some upsets? Who's the most likely out of the three? Out of Flagship, HLXC, and Solace Victorum? Who's going the farthest?
The easiest call here is that it's not Solace Victorum.
Okay. Yeah, we can eliminate that one.
It's a difficult first game. O2 Blast, I think, can play basically whatever they want and probably win over Solace Victorum, which is rough for Solace Victorum. Hopefully, it's a good experience for them. Looking at the bracket in particular. So, like the run for the Chinese teams is Solace versus O2 Blast, Flagship versus T1. HLXC versus Ground Zero Gaming. Now, out of those, the only one that I don't think I can call is HLXC Ground Zero Gaming because I didn't follow Australia that closely. I don't have a good grasp on what their talent level is like at Ground Zero. On strength of schedule here, I kind of feel like it's got to go to HLXC.
Sure. I think HLXC will take that one. For me, the tough one to call is Flagship versus T1.
Okay.
Definitely. Again, to harken back to the previous episode with Paul and LaFon, if you are interested in Korea, go check that out. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But that was another team that I heard from them that was just we're not so sure. Could drop some spaghetti, So, is there a potential upset in the making there a little bit? I'm sensing a little hesitation.
So the problem is these are because they've been separated from international play for so long. They are Galapagos regions, right? They have their own quirks in how they play, and until we start introducing them onto the same island, it's really hard to say definitively how that goes.
Yep.
I think Flagship can take this.
Yeah,
I'm here for it.
I think Flagship can take this.
I'm here for it. I like the energy
too. Yeah. Okay. No, I want to see Seawave and Night God just come in and take over the server. To me, that would just put the biggest smile on my face. I'm not 100% sure that's what would happen, but
but even just a percent.
I believe it's probably realistically it's probably 60-40 in T1's favor. Okay. But damn it, I'm gonna nudge that 40 as close as I can to 50-50. I'm gonna give them all of the hopium.
So if I'm taking away my objectivity here, I did try and do this earlier because I thought, it'd be fun for me to retweet the bracket that was released on Twitter with my own take on it, and I went, I'm just voting for the Chinese teams because I like them because I've been watching them more. So I just don't know if I can be objective.
Yeah. Sure.
How crazy would it be
to just homer it, right?
Yeah.
Flagship and HLXC would then meet each other in the semifinals.
It's international competition, like you said. We haven't seen it in God knows how long. Could be on a new patch. What do you do? How do you make this call? It's a really difficult one.
So what I will say, we figured this out whilst we were in the call before this. Whilst the Pacific third-party qualifiers that finished yesterday were on the live patch, this upcoming main body tournament is actually on the current OPR patch. So this is the tournament realm. So we are probably going back, unless there is a change between, and we are still in the middle of the contender season for Europe. I can't imagine it's changing in that time.
Yeah.
We're going to be back to the Winston Kiriko Rush meta. And so everything you know about how Flagship and HLXC and Solace Victorum perform is still valid because nothing has changed there.
Gotcha.
Okay, and if there's got to be... Okay, we've gotten this whole time, and we haven't mentioned HLXC pulling out this avant-garde composition.
Oh my god, I'd forgotten. I'd blanked
in winners finals and grand finals.
Yeah.
And it worked really well in winners finals and not so much in grand finals. And where they pull out the Diva, Ash Tracer, and then was Bapt Zen?
Yeah.
Okay. Or on a Zen. It was on a Zen.
Jeff, it upset me so much that I had blanked it from my memory, is where I am with that.
But it worked. I mean, winners finals, it worked incredibly well.
Okay, but in grand finals, if you run it one map and it doesn't work, you then don't, you just go back. You go, okay, we're done. Experiment over.
No, and HLXC get full held not once but twice, back to back.
Yeah. Is this? I'm a sucker for some cheese. I'm a sucker for some good old creativity. So when I hear something like that, my brain immediately goes to like escort, like a defensive escort hold.
Dorado.
That sounds like a Dorado comp.
Yeah,
it was King's Row as well. Defense on point A at King's Row.
Okay.
Where they set up the Ashe in the back right corner and use the D.Va to bounce up. They performed it beautifully in Winners Finals. Like they stopped. Like Flagship eventually get the point, but they don't get much farther than A if memory serves.
And this is HLXC that's doing the weird stuff?
Yes, it's HLXC that's doing the weird stuff because then LiGe gets to play D.Va.
Yes, which
it's another that falls more within his
wheelhouse
strong
pick. Yeah.
Correct. And you also get Kaylee on Ashe.
Which seems like a pick for him. It definitely is.
And we gave October 2 our player of the match for Winners Finals because of the Tracer performance was able to shut down C-Wave. Which, I mean, that's like saying you just shut down Proper as far as the equivalent in Chinese contenders.
Yeah.
Not saying C-Wave is the same level as Proper. Big disclaimer on that.
Lean into it. Make bold swings.
Make my title is super easy.
Yeah, no. But did indeed shut down widely considered the best Sojourn player in the region.
If you hamstring the Sojourn out of that composition, it's just like you lose so much of that posture threat where it's just like sometimes you just hit a rail and you win the fight, and it's just like if you can get even just a leg in edgewise, if you can pepper him a little bit, distract him, pull his attention off the angle, you give your Sojourn or maybe even your Ashe so much more room to work with. So it makes a lot of sense as to why it feels very Chinese, feels very within their realm of
I want to jump in there because we have this historical picture of Contenders China as it's the wacky region. Oh boy, that show was some Chinese Overwatch. I think we are past that. We had that in A-sides. In their defense on A-sides, they'd had the game for a handful of weeks. And it was new to them. If you look at what was run for the majority and how it was run and how it was played, I think the Chinese circus just isn't there anymore. I do think this is a region that is going to play what is appropriate for the meta. Now, whether that is a symptom of the fact that this is more obvious in Overwatch 2, what works and what doesn't work, I guess remains to be seen. But I think this certainly for casters who are covering China, please stop talking about Contenders China being the silly region because it just isn't anymore.
Right. I mean, and Flagship Recreators ran Metacom. Like they ran Winston Rush the entire time. You didn't see X-Ray playing 10 different tanks. Like the entirety of Run It Back, they did what they did, and they did it very, very well. Now, they did make adjustments going up against that D.Va comp that we were talking about. I believe we saw Night God flipped over to the Echo on Dorado to help handle the weird D.Va comp. Like, there was adjustments made, which I loved, by the way. Like, we saw that creativity.
Because it forces, like, a response, like you're saying.
Yeah, it makes you think. As a player, it makes you think, and then as viewers, then you're thinking about like, oh, well, what are they trying to do with this? Like, I don't know. It's you get out of just autopilot mode and you actually start examining what the strengths and weaknesses of the heroes are and the interactions between them, and it gets interesting. Like, it's part of what makes Overwatch so amazing. Why we all love it, right? If there's more than just 5 heroes in the game, but. To circle back around, we took the long, winding path, scenic route, smelt some flowers. I hope HLXC don't pull out this bullshit in Pacific Showdown.
They might manage it against Ground Zero. I'm happy to be corrected on that one because I didn't follow it that far. But yeah, don't do that against O2 Blast because they will laugh at you and then stomp your face into the curb.
Most likely, and this is some hopium for me because I love a good upset. I love a good, let's shake things up. But if esports history is anything to go by, the way you try to tackle the Korean juggernaut usually is to not throw them what they're used to, right? You want to give them a little cheese, you want to give them some aggression, you want to throw them off a little bit. So I'm gonna take the stance that if HLXC happens to run across an O2 Blast, maybe a T1, and you do happen to go to Dorado, if you do happen to maybe go to like an Eichenwald and you can get like a good defense on B, and you just happen to be on Diva, I'm not gonna be mad at it.
I'll tell you where we saw it. It was on Sanctuary. It was on Busan Sanctuary.
Okay.
Kings
makes
Row
a little bit more
defense.
sense. That one I can see. Dorado, it feels like it's the strong one though.
Yeah.
No, and Dorado. Those were the three where they pull it out, and it was consistent on those three for both days. They pulled it out on specifically Sanctuary, on specifically Kings Row defense. Like they had a plan for it. Clearly, like it wasn't just roll the dice. There wasn't a game plan going in. So, you know what? You got a point. Maybe they do it once, but as Phil mentioned earlier, like
you don't
do it
keep
on
doing
Busan and you get smashed. Don't pull it out again.
The strength of that, because this is very similar to like what the Valiant coaching staff did or I think it was this season, if memory. And the play gears are starting to unwind, but
dude,
the time still kind of melds together right now. So I believe it was this season.
Time warp.
Yeah. Dorado for them was very, very similar. They utilized a lot of Diva. They had the double flex. They had the hit scan kind of sitting in the back. They abused those long sight lines. I feel like you could maybe get away with it on like Coliseo for at least the first fight. Busan I can see, Kings Row I can see. I like the tailored strats. I like the very point specific stuff. So like that's definitely something that fans and viewers should keep an eye on, where it's just like, okay, well, if you are going up against the odds on favorite and you probably just can't mirror and hold a candle to them, why not try a little a little sideways, try to throw them a curveball. I'm here for it. I'm all about it.
You make good points, my friend. You make good points.
I'm interested to see it.
I am historically a big fan of these curveball teams. Like, I am the world's biggest Clockwork Vendetta. Clockwork Vendetta fan. And so there absolutely is a place for it, because, a team like Clockwork Vendetta kind of changed the meta because everyone had to adapt into them. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a time and a place. Like, Clockwork Vendetta, the reason that worked is they have such a track record on those particular heroes, and there's just like this niche clicking together. Mm-hmm. When you are in map 4 of a 4-map series, is not the time to start throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what works. Like, more than happy to see some problem solving going on, but it's got to be sensible problem solving.
Agreed, 100%. Time and a place, I think, is the mantra there that I think everybody needs to hold within them, because you maybe you don't want to throw out the cheese last game. It's the ultimate gambit of, well, they'll never expect it, but it's like, but should you really do that with the tournament on the line? I don't know, maybe not.
If we're being honest, I mean, HLXC got beat in the Winston meta. Like, that's where Flagship beat them. Like, it wasn't they on Dorado, on Kings Row, where they lost was their offense. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't their defense that lost them. That they got full health. Their offense did nothing. So, in all fairness, they lost that grand finals mostly in the Winston. Yeah, they did get comp diffed. I mean, like when they went into push, and it wasn't great. But they were getting beat in the Winston meta.
Sure. But I think there is a broader question about your attitude as a team to be talked about here, which is, if you are a team that has coaching staff with some experience behind you, what is the better use of time? Is it that you go all in on learning something new, where you don't have the game footage, where you've got to go out of your way to find scrim partners that can put up a good performance against you as you try this new stuff? Or is it to knuckle down and iron out the wrinkles in your approach to the meta? And now I think there's value in both, but I think when you have a team that has the talented pieces that HLXC has, I do feel like it is more efficacious for you to go and just fix what's wrong than throw the whole thing out and start fresh.
Yep. That's the conundrum since the old GOATS era. It's like, do we stick with running the GOATS and refining it and trying to catch back up, or do we actually Shanghai this and lock 4 DPS and run it down, right? Like,
I was so mad at the timing of that roll-up because it just looked like Shanghai had cracked it, and then we just got rid of it entirely.
They absolutely cracked it. It's one of the greatest runs in Overwatch League history. They beat all the best GOAT teams to come in and win stage 3.
And they forced Shock to adapt to them. And if we end the series with the Orisa and the triple DPS, and to circle this all the way back around, yes, it's Shanghai, but like, that idea came from Contenders China. That idea came from a lot of the third-party stuff, where we were seeing 4, maybe even 5 DPS picks.
It was Wrecking Ball triple
insane.
DPS. It was the core of the comp, but
it was nuts to see such a divergence, and like I'm right there with you, Phil, when it comes to like the wacky inflatable arm region. Because it does such a disrespect to like the creativity of it, and it's just like, okay, I'm not playing this whole triple tank, triple support. Like, we're gonna try to like counter this. We're gonna anti-strat this. We're gonna try to get in there and reverse engineer it, and it feels a lot more tailored. It feels a lot more purposeful than I think a lot of people give it credit for, because it is easy to just go, well, they just play the Junkrat character and he's just a happy little funny silly guy, and there is more to it there, and there is some impact. So I wholeheartedly agree, but I do love me some cheese.
I mean, you make a really good point, though. If Shanghai Dragons hadn't had the guts to go in and completely go against it and do what they did, we would have been deprived one of the greatest runs in history.
Agreed.
Like, that was ingenuity and I mean, just balls, like just bravery to go in there and make that happen at the highest stage in the most tense of competitions, you know, like at the highest stakes where you're in a stage playoffs. Like, it wasn't in a throwaway game. Like, they pulled that out when it mattered most and made one hell of a run. And I mean, like, and so to tie this in, you know what? If HLXC can make it work, like, do your thing, but
I feel like I feel like we're just selling all the Chinese stocks to all the fans out there that are actually going to watch APAC. You know, if there's a cheesy team out there that could throw you some curveballs, could be a team from China. It sounds like it's HLXC.
If that's the takeaway from our visit to this, I am all for it. I feel like that's a job well done. So
I think there's a little bit more in there than just, hey, there's a cheesy team you need to pay attention to.
No.
I think it's been an absolute treat, and I don't want to take up your evening too much. I know that time zones are all over the place, so I do want to give this last little bit to you guys and to shout out some personal projects or whatever's going on. So Bullskunk, we'll start over on your end. Where can people find you? I know you have your Twitter directly underneath you, but what you got going on?
Yeah, I mean, following the Twitter helps a lot. Like, as a caster, like, job applications will have a number of Twitter followers as something you put on a job application. So I mean, just following the Twitter can actually help me get gigs and continue to do this thing I love so much. So my streaming has been kind of hit or miss the past year. So sure. I mean, I'm on Twitch and stuff too, but I'm just going to stay single-minded. If a follow on the Twitter would put a smile on my face.
There you go. Make him smile. Phil, what's up with you?
I would also like to promote Jeff's Twitter. Go give him a follow. It helps him a lot. Maybe I should have checked before this. Can we plug a thing that is maybe slightly a rival here?
I wasn't going to.
Rival? What's that?
Oh, so we do have our own T2 focused podcast. It doesn't overlap with It doesn't overlap with you guys too much because it is specifically a Tier 2 and grassroots podcast. So
it is
Jeff
specifically
and
Path to Pro.
Yeah, Path to Pro focused. So myself and Jeff, along with our friends, Chef Billy and Oceancast, Billy and Ethan, run a podcast called Map 5, which, granted, it's been a little bit slow for us recently because we've been so busy with work, which is such a problem to have. And,
good busy.
Go give us a follow on Map 5 podcast. Jeff, help me out here.
Yeah, it's Map 5 Podcast on Twitter.
Map 5 Podcast on Twitter. You'll find out when we go live. And, we do a lot of coverage of
it's on Twitter.
Contenders China, Contenders Korea, all the grassroots stuff that happens. So if you want to stay up to date on non-Overwatch League, competitive Overwatch, we think that's a good thing.
Awesome. Yes.
Yeah, we leave the OWL stuff to you guys. But we try to cover some of the collegiate and grassroots stuff.
There's definitely we need coverage on that because gonna love Blizzard, but it's
somebody's got to do it. Right?
Somebody's got to do it. You said it, not me.
There's a lot of work at this level which is done for the love of the game and the love of the scene, and that's kind of what Map 5 is for, is to shine a spotlight on that passion.
Good. I couldn't again. Anybody who's a fan of this podcast, go show some love to Map 5. And I know we have some T2 homers in the chat, so I expect to see some names over there. But
I felt bad plugging another podcast.
No.
Thank you for.
That's what that space is for. I need, we got to share the love. It's nothing but support. So
you're too kind, my friend.
Hey, gotta do it. But that is going to be Contenders China. If you're a fan of T2, check out Map 5, like and subscribe, because we're coming back not next week, but the week after with some NAU stuff. So stay tuned. And that is going to be it from us. Thank you so much for the both of you coming on and spending some time talking shop with Contenders China. Tactical Crouch,
absolute pleasure.
we will see you in the next episode, 275. Adios.